Hi, my name is Alicia, and today we're going to be talking about the built-in tax engine into Microsoft Dynamics D365 Finance and Supply Chain. In the example today, we're going to be looking at Chicago, Metro Pier, as well as River Grove. So inside of Microsoft Dynamics D365 Finance and Supply Chain, I have set up these tax rates based on the state, the county, and the city, and the special by zip code, and that'll be the example for today. And I also used River Grove so that we could see that as an example. So inside of Microsoft Dynamics D365 Finance and Supply Chain, I'm going to hit my house to go home, and I'm going to click on the Globalization Studio tile. Then I'm going to click on Tax Calculation. Now I'm going to be looking at USA, and you'll notice on the right hand side that you can have multiple drafts of this setup. I'm on draft number 7, as you can see here, and it's in a status of draft. If it's in a complete status, you can only view the setup. If it's in a draft status, you can actually edit it. So I'm going to click Edit in the upper right-hand corner. In here, you're going to see that I've set up a tax code based upon the requirements for Chicago Metro as well as River Grove. I also set up a tax code for exempt. For exempt, I flagged it as an exempt with a 0 rated tax. Then I have Chicago Metro Pier City for 1.5% to 1.25%. I have Chicago County for 1.75%, Chicago Special for 1%. Then I have River Grove City for 2%, River Grove County for 1.75%, River Grove Special for 1%, and then I have Illinois State for 6.25. So the first thing you want to do when you're starting out is get all of your tax codes set up, and then with our corresponding tax rates. The next thing we're going to do is set up a tax group. So what the system is going to do when we create a purchase order, a sales order, a free text invoice, and so on, we're going to be associating that with a tax group and an item tax group. So what that means is that if I am doing Illinois, Chicago Metro, it knows that I need these tax codes because I'm going to be paying different tax authorities for each one of these codes. Say for River Grove, if I have a ship to address as River Grove, I'm going to need these tax codes, which then corresponds back to the tax codes that we set up just a moment ago. So we have our tax groups, and of course we have our exempt set up as well. We're going to set up an item tax group. In this particular example, I'm going to group all of our item groups together. Now you could get very sophisticated with this and create multiple tax groups to say if it's a certain type of item, I'm going to create a different item group for it. In this example, we're going to be grouping them all together. So as a result of that, I created an item group called All Items, and I put all of the tax codes in that one group. You can also set up tax jurisdiction groups. I did not set those up for this example, but it is an option. The next thing we're going to do is set up the applicability rules. This is really where the magic happens. So the beautiful thing about setting up the tax engine is that you, as the person doing the work, say the purchase order, the sales order, free text invoice, and so on, you don't have to know anything about tax. There's nothing you have to know because whenever you create a purchase order or sales order, the system's going to go look at these applicability rules and determine what the tax group is. So in this example, I chose to set it up by zip code. Again, you do not have to set it up by zip code. I did this as an example. If you decide you want to set it up some other way, that's perfectly fine. In this example, I'm saying if the ship to on the line is 60684, 60674, and so on, then I'm going to use these tax groups. And so based upon that information, the system knows what tax group to pull in to the purchase order and the sales order, and then calculate the appropriate tax. One thing you also want to do, if you decide that you want to get a little bit more complicated or a little bit more detailed in this, because maybe you want to discriminate on a procurement category or you want to discriminate on something else, you could certainly do that. And in just a bit, I'll be showing you an example for value-added tax, and you'll see that the setup here at the bottom is a bit different. If you decide you do want to set this up differently, all you do is click on Manage Columns, And these are all the fields that you can query on or create a rule against. So if you wanted something for currency, for example, you just hit the arrow here to add, and then click OK, and then that would add that to the screen, and you'd be able to query on that. For the item tax group applicability, I set one up for service items and inventoried items, and I'm telling it to go to the same tax group. When you're doing your setup, if you do not do this piece, then when you're actually creating your purchase order or your sales order, you will not get an item tax group. If you do not get an item tax group on the line of the purchase order or the sales order, you will not get any tax, because it is actually a combination of the sales tax group and the item tax group, and where they intersect is where the system actually knows to calculate tax. You can also set up list code applicability, customer tax registration number applicability, and vendor tax registration number applicability, but that is not a part of the demonstration today. Once you have the configuration set up, again, the configuration is simply the tax code, the tax group, the item tax group, and then again, this is really where the magic happens, is in the applicability rules. We're now ready to use these codes inside of Dynamics D365 Finance and Supply Chain. So we're going to click Save at the top, and we're going to hit our back arrow. This must be in a completed status before you can use it. So we're going to, at the top, we're going to click on Change Status and Complete. Once this is done, we're going to go into Tax, the module for tax, and go into Tax Calculation Parameters. This gives you the ability to have different tax rules set up for different legal entities. You could set up different nodes, like I had a USA tax and a VAT tax. You can do it that way. You can also have them on different versions. So here I have it set to USA, but you can see it's set to version 6. So the changes that I just made would not be reflected in this environment until I change this version number. So I'm going to go down to USA 7. You'll notice that the business processes that you can do it for is sales, purchase, inventory, free text inventory, journals, and projects. All right, so now that we have the tax calculation parameters set up, what that looks like inside of the system, if we want to go under sales tax and sales tax codes, if we go under Illinois, here for example, the River Grove County, we can see that the source came from a tax calculation service. So that tells us it came from the tax engine. You can also see the percentage here. So again, sales tax code and values, and you'll be able to see that here. If you are using the tax engine, you do not want to update the tax rate here. You would want to go back into the tax configuration where we just were and update the rate. So if the rate for River Grove County were to change from 1.75 to something else, then you'd want to be sure to go into the tax engine, update the rate, and then the system would update this screen from the tax engine. So be sure you do that. The other thing I want to point out is a settlement period, the ledger posting in the ledger posting group. Very, very important pieces of information. I did not show this to you, but when I actually assigned the tax aversion to this legal entity, if these tax codes did not exist in the system yet, it would have popped up and asked me for the settlement period and the ledger posting group. So it's important that you have that configuration set up ahead of time. I do want to call this out because it's important. If you don't have this set up correctly, then you will not be able to pay the tax authorities at the end of the month or the end of the quarter. So the first thing we want to do is set up the sales tax authority. Again, if I go down here to my Illinois, you'll want to set up a sales tax authority for each government body that you have to pay. So typically that's going to be by tax code. In this particular example, I'm saying that I have to pay Chicago Metro Pier, and then here's the vendor for Chicago Metro Pier. Okay, and then we're going to have, and it could go to the same one if you're in a situation where the taxes are, maybe you have different tax rates, but you're paying the same government authority. You could share the same vendor. I may have actually done that on some of these, but here's 288, so there's this vendor, and then I created another vendor for the county. So here's Illinois Cook County, which is where that will go, and then we have our special for Chicago Metro, and then we have the same. So you can see I've created different vendors for each one of those. That's telling the system that as we're calculating these taxes, I'm going to do a settlement function, and because these vendors are tied to the sales tax authorities, the system will actually create an AP invoice for me. That way when I go to the government portal and pay it, then I can then go do a payment journal and settle that against the AP invoice that the system is going to make for each one of these legal entities. Now, how does it know how frequently you're going to pay these government bodies? So that's the next piece that I want to show you. If you're in the system and you go under sales tax settlement periods, again, here we have Chicago City. So I have my settlement and I have my authority, which is what I just showed you a second ago. I have my terms. So in this case, I set them up as net 30. And I'm saying that I'm paying in months, and it's going to be once per month. Now, it could be that you pay quarterly as well, depending on the volume or the government body that you're doing. At the bottom of the screen, it has period intervals. So you're going to click add for the first time and give it the range, and then after that you can say new period interval, and it'll just add another period. So here there's 6, 7, and then 8, and it knows what this date range in because I told it that it was a month here. All right, so once this is set up, and one other thing I want to show, actually 2 more things I'm going to show. So we have our sales tax codes, which again, very important, that comes over from the tax engine. Before setting up the tax engine, you do want to set up your sales tax authority and your settlement periods. The other thing is the sales tax groups, and they came over from the tax engine. Again, I know that because the source is tax calculation service. So here we can see that we have our River Grove City, County, Special, and Illinois State. And if we look at this one, we can see that we have our Chicago Metro Pier for County, Special, State, and then this one be our city. Okay, so that's the configuration. Once you have that down, now we're able to transact. So the first thing we're going to transact on are purchase orders, but before we do that, I want to show you the vendor records. So here are the vendors. I created 2. I created one for our Chicago vendor, which is the Chicago Metro Pier vendor, and then we have the River Grove vendor. On here, you'll notice that the tax fields I left blank. So if I were to go down here, see tax group under invoice and delivery, this is blank. You do not populate this because it is going to come from the tax engine. The same is true on the address. So if I go into the address and go to advanced, you're going to see a tax field, but we do not populate that tax field. Here again, you can see the tax. We do not populate that. And that's because, again, it's coming from the tax engine. So we want to leave these 2 fields blank. All right, but you can see that I have an address on here of 60684, which is our Chicago vendor. And then if we look at our Grove vendor, we can see that that is coming to River Grove. Now, again, this is a ship. This is where the vendor is sending the goods from, and taxes based on where it's going to. So when I do the purchase order here in a second, you'll see how that plays out. But I did want to call out the fact that those tax fields inside of the vendor record and the vendor address are left blank, and you want it that way. All right, so now we're going to go over here and create some purchase orders. So I've created 2 purchase orders. So again, here's our Chicago vendor and here's our River Grove vendor. If I go into this purchase order, you'll see I have 1 item on here, right? Nothing fancy, a quantity of 1 and a unit price of 100. At the top of the screen, under the Purchase Fast tab at the top, under Sales Tax, I'm going to click this, and you can see it says it is exempt. Now, why is it saying that? Again, this is a Chicago vendor. The reason it is saying that is because if I go down here under address, I'm having it go to this one to Beverly, Massachusetts, okay? So if I go back to my tax engine and look at Beverly, at that particular zip code, just as an example, in the applicability rules, we can see that I have it going to exempt. That is the why it's going to exempt. On this other one, if I look at this purchase order, we can see again the item, and we can go, it's going to River Grove because it's based again on the ship to. When I click on sales tax up here at the top, we can see that it's actually pulling in the tax codes for that particular ship to. You can also see the tax codes under the setup section at the bottom of the screen. You can see that the item sales tax group says all items, and the sales tax group is this Illinois River Grove tax group. So as a result, those combinations allowed us to get this particular tax calculation. Moving on to customers, I've created 3 different customers here. So I have the Chicago customer, the River Grove customer, and then I have an exempt customer. Again, if we open up each one of these, we will notice that on the address, if I go into more options and advanced, we will notice that the tax field is blank, as well as on the actual customer record. Under the invoice and delivery fast tab, you can see that the sales tax group is blank. And again, they should be blank. Again, if we look at the other one for River Grove, we can see that the address is the River Grove address. Now, one of the things I want to show you about exempt, a lot of times you may have customers that are exempt and you don't really know how to keep track maybe of when the exemption is going to expire. So that's really important to keep up with. You'll notice on the invoice and delivery, again, I have a tax exemption number here. So what you would want to do, and again, if you hit the drop down there and it doesn't show up, just click party and say all and you'll see it there. So you want to do the tax exempt number here. And then at the top under attachments, you want to click new, and I'm going to go to file and browse, and under my downloads, I have an example that I have downloaded. Okay, and then in this section here, this metadata settings piece, what I want to do is say when is the certificate active from and to. So I'm actually going to go up here and let's just say that the certificate was valid from January through, I don't know, let's say November. Now this is all great because you can put this in here, but how are you going to remember to go change this? So this is what I want to show you. Under the options section at the top, you can say create a custom alert. And when you do this, you can tell the system that you want to do the document reference, and this is going to be active to. In the event, you want to say is due in. So when this comes up to be, whatever that date happens to be, if I want to get notified, let's say 2 weeks before that, 2 weeks before the end of November, the system will send me an alert telling me that this certificate is going to expire. You can do this for all records, or you can just do it for the record that you're on. So if you don't want to set this up every time you do an exemption, then you can just say all records, and then the system will keep track of that. And every time you add a customer with an exemption, then the system will look at this active to date, and 2 weeks before it is due, it will actually send you an alert. And you can say alert me until, and again, just usually no end date. And then you can say, how do you want to be alerted? You can populate this like it could be customer exemption is going to expire. And then you can put whatever note you want in here. That's the subject of the email. This would be the body of the email. This is who it's going to go to, or you can send it to a user group. because it may be that you want multiple people to be notified. You can send an email, or if you're using something with Power Automate, you can send it externally as well, and then you can put an email address there. All right, so what that means is 2 weeks before that due date, it will actually pop up and send you an alert that it's going to expire. And again, that's under the attachments, and then I went to options and create a custom alert. So we have 3 customers. We have our Chicago customer, our River Grove customer, and our exempt customer. The next thing we're going to do is a sales order. So I've created 2 sales orders, and I'll go through here in a second and create one for the exempt as well. If I open this up, I have my item, a quantity of 100 there. Again, I click on my sales tax, and because it's going to Chicago Metro, then I have those tax calculations here. Now, in the event that you disagree with this, or maybe there's something that's a little bit unique about this one order, you can go under adjustment and you can say override calculation. And when you do that, then you can actually type in the actual sales tax amount. So it does give you the ability to override the tax amount here if you choose to do so. You can also override it under the setup section in the lines. You can say override sales tax, and it'll open up the item sales tax group and the sales tax group, and you can actually change those if necessary. This is all based upon your security roles, so it can be restricted if you want to prevent the users from doing that. If we look at our River Grove customer, I made a quantity of 2. Again, under setup, we can see our item tax group and our sales tax group. And if I click on sales tax, we can see that we have our River Grove calculations. And if I create another one, for my exempt, so I add my item, and now when we click on sales tax at the top, we will see that it is exempt. Moving forward to free text invoices. Here is a free text invoice for our Chicago Metro customer. Because of the configuration that I have set up, whenever I did a free text invoice, the system automatically calculated tax. So when I click on sales tax at the top, that came through automatically. We are now going to go under declarations, sales tax, or report sales tax for settlement period. In this particular example, we're going to be doing the Illinois state. And we're going to be doing this starting for the month of April. Here I can say include details. I'm going to say yes. And again, this is going to give me a detailed report of how the tax is calculated. This allows me to determine what the tax will be prior to actually creating the AP invoice for that governing body. Again, you can see the state, you can see the receivable and the payable. You can see the tax code, the voucher, and the corresponding amounts. If this information is accurate, you're now ready to generate the AP invoice. To generate the AP invoice, you go under Settle and Post Sales Tax. And again, we're going to do it for Illinois State, and we're going to say from date of April 1st. And the system knows that that's going to be through the end of April because of our settlement period, which is set up for monthly. Beautiful. So the system prints the report again for your records. So it's not necessary to print it ahead of time, but again, it is a good idea to do that because once we've done this process, it has created an AP invoice. So if we go back to all vendors and we look at our Illinois vendors, so I'm going to hop back over here to my overview and I'm going to say contains Illinois. And if we look at Illinois State, and if I go to vendor and transactions, we should see that we have an invoice there for tax for that amount. So here we have a sales tax payment for $6.25 with a date of 4/30. So now the next time we do a payment proposal, or we could do an intentional payment proposal for this particular vendor or tax vendors, then we can go in and pay those. So that would complete the cycle from setting up the tax engine all the way through transacting and creating the AP invoice for sales tax. Just briefly, I want to touch on value-added tax for those in our audience that may be using value-added tax in the rest of the world. So I'm going to go back to the tax calculation. So again, if I'm at my home screen, I go into Globalization Studio, tax calculation, and then VAT. And I'm just going to view this one. I want to give you an idea of what the configuration might look like in a bit more of a complex situation. Under tax codes and tax groups, same thing. We have a reduced tax, reverse tax, standard tax, and zero rated tax with their corresponding tax rates. We have our tax groups and the associated tax codes, and then we have our item tax group. In the applicability rules here, I'm saying if I'm doing a purchase order and if the procurement category is postage and is going from GBR to GBR, then I want a zero rated tax. If we go down and grab another example, we can say if I'm doing a sales and it's an item, then I want a zero rated tax if it's going from GBR to GBR. And if I go down just a bit more, we can see one set up for, again, another purchase order one. We can see one for third country region. And I do want to point that out quickly because that is a configuration that you do inside of D365. So if I go into, let me switch to legal entities here. Under tax and foreign trade, parameters, there is a country region's properties. This is how the system knows whether a country is considered domestic, third party country, or if it's EU and so on. When you're setting up the tax calculation engine, this is how the system knows what country type you're referring to. So that's super important. And then again, you have your tax group. You'll notice that there's multiple columns here that we did not have in the US setup configuration. And this is just to give you another flavor or example of how the tax engine can be set up. So until next time, keep your head in the clouds and keep working wise.